What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing Alec Newald, who claims to have been abducted and kept on a spaceship for 10 days, and then I found another encounter where someone claimed to have been abducted for multiple days before being brought back to Earth. So, I talk a lot on this channel and in general about extraterrestrials and abductions. There are so many different types of abductions and so many extraterrestrial species. I can't even imagine how many we aren't even aware of yet on both counts. Somehow discussing topics like these makes it become somewhat blasé, which in and of itself should be very concerning to us if that's the case. If something like being abducted by aliens is old hat, maybe there's a problem with us. Or a problem here. However, I will say that no matter how much I come back around to this topic, I can't get enough of it, and every once in a while there's an abductee or two who will come along with a story so strange and unbelievable, I can't help but to jump in and further investigate it and hope that I can find some backup information or actual facts so that I'm able to believe in it. That's exactly what I brought to you all today. There is a man named Alec Newald who claims he was not only abducted by aliens, but that he was kept with them for 10 whole days before they returned him back to his home in New Zealand. Let's dive right in, shall we? February of 1989 is where it all began, with Alec Newald claiming that while driving along one night, something happened that made it so his car was about to go flying into and then careening off of a very steep cliff. He said that at first he sincerely thought that he had reached the afterlife and that he had in fact gone headlong off of that cliff, vehicle and all, and that he had died and crossed over. Quote, "I was driving the car and it felt like a ton of bricks had landed on me, like someone had poured cement on me. I felt like I was pushed into the seat of the car," end quote. Alec claims that he thought he had died because when he came to, he knew somehow that he was in spirit form and that the other beings around him, who mostly seemed to be people or human beings, were also in the same spiritual state. This thought lasted only a couple of minutes though, when all of a sudden he was approached by these tiny little strange looking creatures. They were 3 to 4 feet tall and had large heads with very squinty and beady eyes. One of these beings was very clearly and very obviously the leader of this little pack here. This leader approached Alec and spoke to him, telepathically saying, quote, "Welcome, I am the designated guardian of this section. Anything that you feel you might need to make your stay with us more pleasant, ask and I shall do my best to supply it. The suit you have been given will make it possible for you to understand us and us you," end quote. Alec describes what happened next and says he was given a body and was able to see that the ship he was in was suddenly descending into some foreign and beautiful but eerie kind of city. It was huge and it was fabulous and it was nothing like anything that we have ever seen here on Earth, that's for sure. The buildings in this gigantic city had 3 shapes: tubular, round, and pyramid shaped. The architecture was bold and somewhat astounding, and Alec couldn't get enough of everything he was seeing and taking in all at once. He was escorted into some sort of flying or floating car, a hover car maybe, and he was given a tour in this vehicle, which he described as, quote, "a stealth fighter cockpit with no wings," end quote, which was controlled partly by the mind and partly by magnetic repulsion. He claims he was also given a lot of historical information as well as technical information. These particular aliens claim to have helped the evolution of humans on the planet, and also they claim to have helped the evolution of the planet itself as well, that being planet Earth. His stay abruptly ended without much ado or fanfare, as one day he was suddenly back home in his room again in Auckland, New Zealand, and 10 full days had passed. Alec said he was very confused and disoriented. Alec said it didn't take long for him to figure out that whatever had happened to him, it was huge and a mega big deal. He was visited almost immediately after returning home by men who said they were, quote, 2 New Zealand DSIR, Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, scientists, end quote. Alec realized very quickly that these men knew far too much about him, and this fact alone told him these men were definitely not who they said they were, and that they weren't working for the branch of government that they claimed they were, or probably they weren't even working for any type of government or any kind of government officials or agents at all. Alec Newland did write a fascinating book about his experiences for that 10 days he was abducted and staying as a guest to some unknown alien life forms who seemed to know a lot about humans and our planet, and who even claimed, as I stated earlier, to have been very much responsible for our and our planet's evolution. However, it seemed that the more that he tried to promote his book titled Co-Evolution, the more people gave him a hard time. Basically, he was completely and totally ostracized and ridiculed by the general public and the ufology community in general. The little bit of ufology community that there was back in 1989 anyway. Alex stated, quote, "Perhaps an even bigger surprise was, with the exception of a few, the more I tried to share this information, the harder my life became. I was ostracized by people you might have expected support from. In fact, even before I tried to share any of the things I'd learned, my life started to become more than difficult. It became impossible to continue on as I had done before," end quote. Many of the complaints come, though, only because his reports and accounts of his time allegedly spent out of this world are very brief and not very detailed. Like, I still can't figure out what type of extraterrestrials these were or what planet they could have brought him to. I mean, I just think that 10 days there, with his memory being as vivid as it seems to have been, he really blanks on the specifics in a lot of ways. That doesn't mean, though, that I don't believe him or I'm trying to discredit him. Alec is also criticized because it said that his book seems to be more of an interpretation into what might or could have happened to him and less of a first-hand or in-person account of what actually did happen to him. With the way the ufology field in this community is nowadays, though, it's said that Alec and others like him are geared to make a comeback. We want all of the information right from the source's mouth because nowadays we want to believe. It's not like back in the 80s or even the 90s. Alec's story and recounting of the experience he says he endured all those years ago hasn't changed, even if the community with which he is sharing it so drastically has. Quote, "In relating the details of my own experience, I hope I can somehow convey to you that the unknown need to not be something to be feared. Personally, I am looking forward to whatever the future has to offer the human race," end quote. Well, guys, that's actually the end of Alec's story, unless you want to buy his book, which I do recommend. I want to see what you guys think about it. So if you've ever read Co-Evolution, or if you decide to read it, let me know your thoughts on that one. I couldn't end the video 9 minutes in, and I knew this was going to be really short, so I decided to put this next encounter here because it's a very strange one as well, and it happened a really long time ago too. I was going to do an entirely separate video on it, but figured we could round out and end this one with it instead. In the early morning hours of approximately 2 a.m. on a cold January night, way back in the year 1954, while it was still very dark outside, something very strange and eerie was about to happen. A man named Armando Zuberon was in his car driving all along the twisted and winding back roads heading from Mexico City to Acapulco in order to be on time for an early meeting the next day with one of his business partners. At the time, this was no easy journey to take. The roads were deserted, winding, and rugged, and full of mountain passes. Armando was 100% focused and alert because he knew that one tiny wrong move or turn, and he would have a life-altering or life-ending accident. Despite reporting being fully alert and wide awake, Armando claims that suddenly and without warning, he was overcome by an intense and extreme tiredness that penetrated his very bones. He called it, quote, "a hypnotic state of lethargy," end quote. This is where one of the most bizarre yet not really talked about abduction stories of the modern age started to happen. Because of the extreme exhaustion that randomly overtook him, Armando knew it was very dangerous if he continued driving while feeling this way, and so he pulled his car off of the road and stopped. He just wanted to relax for a couple of moments and get his bearings before he continued on with his trip. However, this was when he saw a most unusual and unexpected sight up ahead and directly in front of him. Hovering directly above this small mountain road was a brightly lit metallic disc. Armando tried to look at the light coming from the strange craft, but even while squinting, it was incredibly bright and blinding. From what he could see, there were two extremely tall beings, one on each side of the disc. They seemed to be wearing some sort of skin-tight one-piece suits with a belt cinched over their extremely thin and tiny waists. The belts had very wide brims and looked bizarre on this already strange sight that he was beholding. Though they were still sort of blocked out by the brightness, they also seemed to have very long and flowing hair on their heads. At this point, our witness is still sitting in his vehicle and trying to not only wrap his head around what he is seeing, but trying to figure out a way to get the heck out of there before anything even stranger, or possibly even worse, happens to him. However, he said that as soon as he thought of leaving or taking off out of there, he was overcome with the urge to exit his vehicle and approach the strange figures and the craft itself. He said he felt as though he had no control at all over his own limbs, and I speak often about certain alien entities, mainly the MIB, who we've been talking about a little bit more often than usual the past couple of weeks, walking as though they were a puppet without the marionette strings attached. That's the same here, except it's Armando who felt as though he were being physically manipulated and his body was moving on its own and directly toward these strangers and the strange ship. Despite their being basically androgynous in their appearance, our witness recognized somehow that these entities were both male. They looked human, and I'm pretty sure that they're what we would call today the Nordics as far as what species he may have been dealing with, and this assumption is made completely by Armando's description of them. They had blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. They almost ran to Armando's side to help him walk easier and better control his own limbs. They were very obviously trying to protect him from falling and or hurting himself. They took him by his arms, one on each side, and escorted him into what Armando could now clearly and plainly see was a spaceship, or, as they were so often called back in those days, a flying saucer. The closer he got to the ship, the more a strange buzzing noise and sensation penetrated his ears and his head. Once he was on the ship and steady, he asked the entities where he was and why he had been brought there. One of them responded, speaking perfect Spanish, which was Armando's first language, and it said, quote, "You are neither the first nor the last Earthman to be chosen for our testing. Our task, slow though it may seem, is designed to persuade. We choose the likeliest, most malleable persons for contact so that they might better transmit our messages," end quote. Before he could even try to process this information, he was being shown a bunch of clips from his own life. He said it was almost as though it were a dream, but it was his life and being shown to him somehow projected right onto one of the walls of the giant ship. They didn't hold back either. There were some extremely intimate moments that any human being would be shocked to have to sit there and watch, especially given the extraordinary situation he was already in. Some of the images were from events or times that Armando didn't even barely remember until he saw it playing out there. During this little life review scenario, Armando said he drew the absolute conclusion that these beings had either been watching him for a very long time, could read and have been reading his mind, or both. The images stopped just as suddenly as they had started, and this is where a witness was given a tour of the ship. He was informed that they were no longer on Earth and that they were in fact very much further out along the solar system. Our witness said he felt no acceleration or movement of any kind and was therefore shocked by this revelation. He asked the entities why this was, and they explained to him that they used something called a, quote, gravity repulsion system, end quote. The spaceship neutralized any debris or anything else in its path, and they even let him look out of a circular window or a porthole. He could see nothing but a deep and black darkness underneath a sea of gray mist and nothing. He asked them if they were going to visit their home planet and was told no. For the next several days, Armando claimed the ship just sailed and cruised along, allegedly far out in the galaxy somewhere. In this short period of time, Armando says that he was able to learn how their ship worked and all of the ins and outs of how they traveled the way they did/do. He spent basically the entire time with the extraterrestrials who, let's face it, as nice and as accommodating as they were technically and actually his captors. He admits to having been very confused by a lot of the tech on the ship and that he was especially fascinated and somewhat perplexed by their bathroom facilities. Quote, "I shall never be able to forget it. The bathroom was a new and unimaginable experience for me. Standing upright, facing an angle of the wall filled with tiny holes, I was covered in warm air, and as it grew stronger, it became transformed into damp air, impregnating my skin like a warm, wet breeze. When I was completely drenched, I was offered a sort of liquid soap, which I rubbed all over myself from head to toe. Standing once more before the warm air sprinklers, I felt the soap begin to evaporate and my skin become completely clean. The air then ceased to be damp, turning dry and warm instead of becoming colder until agreeably cool," end quote. Our witness had all of his meals with the beings and described the food as being mainly the same as on Earth, only much tastier and seemingly much healthier. And this is not the first time by a long shot that I've heard this about certain alien races' food that they eat, or that I guess they can eat when in the presence of humans. I think they do it to make them more comfortable, but I really don't know. He said there was meat, cheese, veggies, and even some butter. He said though it was much like what we have here on Earth, it wasn't exactly that. He said though it was somewhat similar, it was nowhere near exactly the same as anything that we have to eat here on Earth. He explained that though there was meat, it was from no animal he had ever heard of, and though there were veggies and they were fresh, they were not of any type he had ever come across or eaten before. Everything he ate was accompanied by this kind of milky-like substance, which the beings told him was their main source of sustenance and that it came from their home planet. They told him they ate many fruits and veggies from here on Earth, and that they were also a huge part of their own diets. They loved mangoes, for one thing, and specifically. They also explained to Armando how they got the food off of the Earth and into their ship. It was allegedly beamed up into the ship by some sort of telepathic means of communication with the energy on Earth or an entity on it helping them, I'm not sure which. That being, I'm not sure if some human or another alien stands below the ship and hovers the fruits and vegetables into it, or if the beings themselves just lifted aboard the spaceship from the inside. I guess that's neither here nor there, but you guys know me. This is the kind of stuff I think about. Armando said that during the course of his stay, he had had many discussions with these seemingly mild, peaceful, and extremely benign beings, and that through the course of these discussions, he learned that their average lifespan is 250 years. In their society, everyone and everything is treated as an equal, with there being no class or status quo. Their way of life was based on something sort of akin to what we would think of as a religion here on Earth. They believed in a being they either called the Master or the Beloved Number 9, and that this being or entity has kept their civilization and culture alive and thriving for millennia. This being creates and keeps the harmony in their society. Eventually, after what he would later discover was 5 whole days, Armando's time with the beings came to a very abrupt end. They brought him back to Earth, back to his car, and back to a world where he wasn't sure he could survive now that he had all of this additional information about out there. His car was still right in the spot where he had left it, and he said goodbye and thank you to the beings, his hosts for those 5 days and 4 nights. After bidding them farewell, Armando somehow just continued right along his journey and headed to Acapulco to meet his business partner. Even though it had seemed like it had been 5 whole days while he was on the ship, he quickly became aware that here on Earth, only 90 minutes had passed, and that he would definitely still make it with time to spare to his meeting that same morning. Even stranger still was that 15 years after all of this allegedly happened, in 1969, Armando was driving to Mexico City and picked up a hitchhiker. This is completely relevant due to the fact that this hitchhiker wasn't your average man. He was a tall and thin man who had blonde hair and super intense and bright blue eyes. The hitchhiker would come forward, according to Armando, completely unprovoked, and admit that he had been one of the crew members aboard that ship all of those years ago, which had basically abducted Armando. Armando would never tell what he and this hitchhiker companion talked about after that, though he does admit they had quite the conversation. In the 1950s, there were so many reports of encounters with or abductions from these so-called Nordic aliens. They were always described as appearing somewhat angelic, tall, slim, and with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. Could they all be somehow connected? Why don't we see these types of abductions that often, if at all anymore, in the 21st century? I'm not saying that we don't ever have encounters being reported with these aliens specifically, but it's hardly how it was back in the 50s. So, who or what did Armando encounter that night? For what purpose and or to what end? Were these actually Nordic aliens? And if so, what does that even really mean? These beings are said to be not only the most friendly toward human beings, but that they are protectors of sorts and watch over us and our planet. Were these even aliens in the sense that we have come to know them, or could they have been, as many people who have met or seen them have reported, actual and true to God angels? Are they some sort of interdimensional beings who are human beings, but a different type of human from one or another realm or dimension? While there are, of course, people out there who are highly skeptical and critical of Armando's account, others often wonder that if he was making it all up, then how in the world did he get all of the technical information he had come forward with? He was a simple rural farmer and wouldn't have had a clue as to most, if not all, of the things he described while recounting his experience. I have no idea, as I don't know Armando personally, and I'm still fairly new to this community, but I do know this. If true, then this man experienced something special and quite spectacular, and as usual, I am totally and completely jealous of the experience, of the adventure, of the meeting with the extraterrestrials and getting to see out there. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed spending this time with me and hanging out. Subscribe if you haven't already, and please spread the love by sharing this video. Check out the description box for some important links how to donate to the channel: PayPal, Cash App, Vero, Patreon, and my Amazon wish list gift link, where if you don't want to or unable to donate money, you can choose a crystal, a figurine, a statue, a piece of jewelry, an oracle deck. I mean, there are so many different variety of things on there. Thank you to everyone who donates your time, your money, gifts. I really just can't thank you guys enough. I mean, you guys are amazing and spectacular, and I really hope that I'm doing a good job at keeping you all entertained. I've hit a few snags on that business website, but I did pay for it in full, so it should be up and running very, very soon. It's not the company that I hired's fault, and it's not really my fault. There's just some snags, some issues along the way, but I'm hoping to have it up by the end of the week, possibly by the time you see this, if not almost. Just trying to give you guys an update. But otherwise, people have been ordering the new crystal roller perfumes, still ordering 4-ounce to 8-ounce sprays, still ordering spiritual helper boxes. I know a lot of you guys would like the actual description there and pricing and all that, but you can email me for that too until the business does get up, so I don't have to continuously lose business as I work on getting my domain name back and getting some better descriptions of what it is that I'm selling. Anyway, join us, meaning me and Ghost Dragons, on Wednesday nights from 7:15 p.m. to 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Gemma Jade channel, for live intuitive oracle, where I pull one random card from a random deck and give whoever wants one, really, first come, first serve, come one, come all, a weekly reading with that card. If you would like a personal intuitive oracle reading from me, if you would like to make a purchase, if you have questions or any other correspondence, please email me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com or MoonBearOracle@gmail.com. If you would like to purchase either one of my books or both of them, Missing the Faith Theory by Gemma Jade and Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories from myself and Steve Stockton, the links for the paperback and Kindle version will be in the description box. But if you would like an autographed or signed copy of either one or both, please email me first before you make the purchase. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.